as you probably know.
The arrow key.
Okay. So our first announcement, oh, he's here, all right. So I just want to say we have two speakers today, and there'll be a question and answer session after each speaker gives their presentation. And unlike we're at the library where we went around with the microphone and had you ask a question, we have a microphone set up for questions over there. Or if you don't want to get up, we have note cards that you may have gotten when you came in, or you can go get one in the back to write a question and we'll ask it for you if you don't want to do it. So with that, we'll start with our first speaker. I'll have Sherry Spain, our newest Livermore Indivisible Steering Committee member, introduce him. Sherry is our, what do I want to call her, researcher extraordinaire who finds all these great speakers for us. So if you've noticed the quality of speakers improve over the past year or so, it's Sherry's work. So thank you.
Sherry.
I'm short, sorry. Today we are honored to welcome James Lance Taylor, Professor of Politics at the University of San Francisco, where he also serves as chair of the Department of Politics. Professor Taylor previously served as a president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. He is the author of the book, Black Nationalism in the United States, from Malcolm X to Barack Obama. He is also has a forthcoming book. He's working on People's Temple, Jim Jones, and the California Black Politics. Please join me in welcoming Professor James Lance Taylor.
I didn't know what kind of turnout to expect. So really, when I saw the cars and that I would have a problem parking, I'm like, whoa, they took this seriously. So I'm glad. None of you know me personally, but I was born and raised on Long Island. The 6 of 7 children to my mom. Went to Pepperdine undergraduate in LA. Went to a junior college in Philadelphia that was a Christian college in Philadelphia that was a sister school to Pepperdine. Went from Pepperdine to USC, got my master's and my doctorate at USC. I've been at USF for 27 years. I'm in my second round as chair of the department. I was on the African American Reparations Committee in San Francisco, so if you really want to talk to somebody about what it was all about, I'm actually a former committee member. Let's see, I've done a lot of work with SFPD and a lot of work with San Francisco Public Defender's Office on both sides. And again, I'm excited to be here because these are some very critical times. And I look at the work that your organization does, and I think what I prepared is very fitting. How many of you remember Arthur Schlesinger? Wow, nice. The majority of the room, so you got to be saying, whoa, this guy walks up here with Arthur Schlesinger as his first bullet. Yes, Cycles of American History. Schlesinger basically frames the framework for the short talk that I have today. I have about 15 slides, and when I get to the end, that'll be it. I don't know, do we have time for Q&A after? Okay. So Schlesinger's argument is basically, as many of you would know, is that there are these generational cycles. For him, they happen about every 20 or 30 years. In party politics, those of us who do party politics, we can measure almost every 30 years a major party realignment in our political system. Some segment of the electorate de-aligns, which is like breaking up with somebody but not going with somebody else. And then another segment of our party system might realign. Say, for example, Catholics were strongly, New Deal Democrats, but they've become more Reagan Democrats, if you will, more recently. Remember the Reagan Democrats? Whatever happened to the Reagan Democrats? They were famous at one time. But what Schlesinger seems to be saying is every 30 years, a generation matures. And they look back 15 years and criticize the previous generation. And then they look forward and try to establish their own agenda about who they are and what they think. So right now, everybody's beating up on the baby boomers right now. So if you're a boomer, it's become a slur, right? It's like a racial slur to call somebody a boomer now, because it's meant by the younger generation to say, hey, we're not satisfied with what we've inherited. And I don't have time to go over all the data, but most of us know that middle classdom, the American dream, is not what it used to be. And it's harder now over the last 20, 30 years for your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren to experience what your father or grandfather experienced, or your grandmother and mother experienced, in terms of the ability to be a working person and to be able to afford a middle-class life. Middle-classdom used to be defined by one income earner that could maintain a household of 4 people. Our society has been fundamentally transformed by economic forces, and I really don't have time to deal with those economic forces in this talk, because I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist, so let's keep that in mind. What I do is what I call American political development, and all it is the original political science, going back to Robert Dahl, or V.O. Key, without the statistics, political science without the math. That's how it used to be. And we've gotten so far off that we've forgotten people like Schlesinger. Let's see here. Do I go down? All right. All right, cool. So these cycles that I'm talking about are generally reflected here. You can see that the Civil War, and again, it's not a perfect 30 years, but it's roughly a generation. The Civil War, the Sectional War. 30 years later, we have Plessy versus Ferguson. After that, you have the Great Depression. Then you have the Civil Rights Movement, which begins in the 50s, but we call it the 60s. But Rosa Parks is 50s, Emmett Till is 55, right? Civil Rights Movement. Then there's the Reagan backlash. I argue that Ronald Reagan is the backlash to Martin Luther King. Reagan is only 12 years after King's death, but Reagan and King are contemporaries. Reagan was governor here in 66, and King came here in 66, and King dies in 68. So it's not like they're from completely different generations. Reagan just lived a lot longer. But the Reagan response, the Reagan Revolution. And then about 30 years after that, you get the election of Barack Obama. And then after that, we're still kind of in that reaction. These cycles of American history happen basically because they reflect a generation coming into its own. So if you're 20 years old in this room, you've been through roughly one cycle. If you're 40, you've been roughly through 2 cycles, going into a 3rd one. If you're in your 50s, you've been through 2 major generational cycles. If you're in your 60s, you've completed 2 cycles. That's the last 2 is Martin Luther King and Ronald Reagan. That's a whole cycle right there. And then if you're in your 70s, you completed 3 cycles, and you're into your 4th. And if you're in your 80s, you've completed 4 cycles of American history. These generational moments. If you were standing here, you could talk about epical moments in each of these periods. And again, this is not neat and scientific alignment of what the different periods are. They're rough and subjective, but they do point to some tendencies and mark off certain periods. So Schlesinger is also famous for the famous book, Imperial Presidency. Anybody ever read that book? I've taught it a few times at USF. I stopped using books altogether at USF because they become so expensive. So now I just use Google Scholar and tell the students to take 20 articles and read them, as opposed to spending $300 for these books. I've been doing that since 2008 when the economy crashed. I gave up on using books in my classes. So at the end of every semester, when students are about to do their faculty evaluations, I always say, don't forget, you didn't pay any money for your books in this class. In the other class, it's like $700. But Schlesinger's famous book about the imperial presidency, marks off the Johnson presidency, parts of the Nixon presidency, and identified them as imperial. And this is because those presidencies acted in a way with less accountability to Congress, or more or less accountability to Congress. Here's Schlesinger's other famous book, 1,000 Days, because he was an insider and an advisor to JFK and to Truman before that. Schlesinger, talks about his experience advising John Kennedy. And then here he's looking at multiculturalism and its effects, which would be a part of one of those cycles in the 80s around Reagan. that he identifies as a disuniting of America, reflections on multicultural society. So Schlesinger is, talking about social change and what's happening in the country. Here, he talks about the vital center, trying to figure out sort of, where, if you sort of look at polarization, and that's what this talk is really about, political polarization. Morris Fiorina is over at Stanford, and he wrote a book called Culture Wars with a question mark. And on it is a donkey and an elephant, red and blue. And the question mark is asking, where is the polarization at really? Is the polarization in the populace, or is the polarization in the parties? And Fiorina identifies polarization in the parties. Then there was a book by a guy named Bill Bishop, and it's old now, in 2004 called, what was the name of the book? It was focusing on Texas and the 2004 election, and he talked about this whole echo chamber effect of when as people are moving, not based on race, but based on ideology. Liberals are moving with liberals. Conservatives are living with conservatives. And they question whether or not the red and blue is in the populace, where people are voluntarily self-selecting to live in communities where people think like you and vote like you. Liberals don't want to live next to conservatives. Conservatives don't want to live next to liberals. I live in Vallejo, and yesterday I went to get some coffee, and there's this apartment building, and I turned around and looked at it, and there was a sign saying Trump MAGA that took up the whole window, and next to it was the LGBTQ flag. So I told the barista, I said, I think they're arguing with each other right now, But that's who we are, and I'll slow myself down and come up to where I'm headed in terms of these dynamics. But the vital center is Schlesinger trying to figure out whether the extremities are in the party system or the extremities in the populace. And I don't know what you think. Is the red and blue in the parties, or is the red and blue in the people? But there's certainly, and again, we have to, thank Tim Russert for giving us this designation of blue and red. But it was there before he designated it blue and red. So then you move on to Eric Foner. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Foner. If you ever read Foner's work, excellent, outstanding scholar on Reconstruction, along with W.E.B. Du Bois. Foner writes the second founding. I don't know if anybody's ever read this book. This, to me, blows my students' minds, because this book basically makes an argument that there were two foundings of the United States, the George Washington founding and the new founding that comes out of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln founding. And it basically says there are two Americas all the time in tension with each other. And the question is, what wins out in a particular cycle, generationally, and these ideologies that I'll show in a minute, they're always present. They're part of the mitochondrial DNA of the United States of America, from generation to generation. So Foner is interested in trying to suggest that the Declaration of Independence is a new America compared to the Constitution that comes 11 years later. In fact, kind of like John Adams and Sam Adams, the cousin, they were interested in this question of whether or not the Declaration of Independence was the Constitution, or whether the Constitution is the Constitution. Most Americans don't think about that, but I'm about to mess you up in a minute. Just hold on. Now, Harold Krauth is my favorite intellectual. He's gone, not popular at all. Had a major moment with this book in the 60s, influenced the Bay Area, the campuses, the Panthers. He ends this book at the very last paragraph, after explaining the tendencies amongst African Americans, like Du Bois on one end, Booker Washington on another, Frederick Douglass on one end, let's say Martin Delany was his rival contemporary on another, Martin King on one end, Malcolm X on another. King says, Krauth, C-R-U-S-E, says it doesn't matter who the people are, but in African American political life in the 20th century, there was a pendulum move every so often, and I think it also reflects the generational pattern, but it's a pendulum move back and forth. He says it doesn't matter who the people are, the ideologies are there waiting for new individuals to emerge, to go Martin King, Malcolm X, Martin King, Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan, Jesse Jackson. That's the most recent permutation of it in the last 30 years. I think it's dead now, the pendulum move. I think that's gone. after Black Lives Matter became this whole other thing, completely disloyal to the previous movements. But I can talk about that later. But Krauth basically produces what I call the pendulum thesis, that leadership personalities come, but the modalities, the ideologies of more or less radicalism, more or less conservatism, come and go periodically. So, I have a question for you. Have you ever celebrated the establishment of the Constitution? People have their hands up. Everybody's like, where's this guy going? Well, how many of you have ever gone out and had barbecue and celebration for 4th of July? Raise your hands. Uh-oh, thank you. There's a couple of people that raise their hands. How many of you ever had barbecue on September 17th? One person. Go ahead, say something. Huh? Oh, your birthday. It's America's birthday too, but this goes to the Eric Foner book, the second, the second founder. This is the question of how many Americans acknowledge the founding of the Constitution on September 17, 1787? Never. But it's required by Congress that everyone observes Constitution Day by law. All universities have to observe Constitutional Day, or Constitution Day, excuse me. September 17th. This blows Americans' minds because they never think about September 17th. They think about 4th of July, but if I say to you, there's 2 foundings, you're like, wait, whoa. But you acknowledge that you've never acknowledged the real birth of the United States of America 11 years after the 4th of July breakthrough with Jefferson. So again, have we ever really celebrated the U.S. Constitution? The Declaration of Independence is 1776. And so the question is, are this sort of duality, what Du Bois called this two-ness of Americanness? The question is, and I'll come to this next in the next slide, but I'm going to point to it now. The original America was George Washington. The umbilical cord went from Washington in the Civil War, not to Lincoln, but to Jefferson Davis. And that's the hard part for us now to accept. The umbilical cord went from Washington to Davis, not to Lincoln. Lincoln becomes the new Washington after the Civil War, and I'll show you the literature that makes that argument. The reason why King is so important is because the values he expressed in I Have a Dream simply are a continuation of the Lincoln line, the Lincoln umbilical, if you will. So, King is important because he reiterates and he restates Lincoln's views in the 20th century. So this is out now. Have you gotten a copy of this? It's on the corner store. It's at the corner store, commemorating the 250th anniversary. What date are they commemorating? 1787? Do you realize it's going to take another 11 years from now to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Constitution? You get my point? So the question is, what is this? For Foner, it's like, what is this duality? What is this two-ness? This book looks at the American Revolution, and it talks about the genocide of the indigenous people, the African enslavement, the different experiences of different non-white populations, right? You see the top says only good Indian I ever saw were dead. If you know anything about California history, the Indians all over Northern California for 3,000 years without war. The Lucayette, that's the Caribbean. I'm sorry. Here you had the Ohlone and other local tribes that were from here, Sacramento, down to San Jose, that did not war. For thousands of years, for as long as the Roman Empire to the American Revolution, that's how long the Native Americans of the Bay Area lived in peace with each other. It's true about Australia, too, with the indigenous, the Indonesians and the Aborigine. They got along for 3,000 years until the British dropped the English criminal class off and called Ireland a convictory. right? I mean, not Ireland, Australia, a convict, excuse me. So here's the real controversial book. Anybody familiar with Robert Bella? Berkeley professor for 40 years, legend. He did a lot of work in Japanese history and culture, but he wrote this book called The Broken Covenant. And he looks at the Constitution as a covenant, like in the biblical sense, of the new covenant and this, the first covenant and the second covenant. Here, Bella comes to a point, he makes the argument that Abraham Lincoln supplants George Washington in the new America. The one that condemned and rejected slavery was the George Washington America. The one he argues that emerges is Abraham Lincoln. So for Bella, he argues that Lincoln ultimately becomes our messianic figure in American history. Lincoln is our Christ figure in the way he emerges out of nowhere. Up around 3 or 4 years, he's on the scene, and then boom, he's taken out. But his blood, according to Bella, who is dealing with religious implications in terms of America's founding and self-understanding as a religious colony, Bella sees Lincoln as the new Washington, and that we, the children who are alive today, should be living from the Lincoln line, not from the Washington line. This is Bella's argument, effectively, that Lincoln becomes both Messiah because of his death, but he also becomes Moses. Like Washington was the first Moses, Lincoln becomes the next Moses, according to Bella. My favorite book, and I think the best book ever written about black life or by anyone black, is The Souls of Black Folk, written in 1903. It has a lot of different popular concepts. Talented tenth, the color line, but he also talks about double consciousness, which is something he got from Harvard University from his professors there, like William James and Santana, I think it is. They taught Du Bois to think in these dualities, right? But it was actually a religious way of thinking about dualities. So for Du Bois, he says black people in America always feel their two-ness. They're never quite African. They're not Africans. They're not Americans. He says that the only thing that keeps them from being destroyed is their dogged strength. That's what he says with this concept known as double consciousness. So a woman can have double consciousness towards the United States, right? She loves it loyally because all of its connections, right? But also how women been treated. It's sort of like, well, I love America, but we can be better in this area, right? And so that's what double consciousness might be. It might be how one has a sort of psychological conflict around our ideas. Cornel West adds, though, that Du Bois doesn't go far enough. This is Cornel West's best scholarly work. Race Matters was something he wrote after the riots of '92, and he just wanted to seize on it and make himself popular, and he did. But this is his best scholarly work. And in it, he takes Du Bois' double consciousness and says, wait a minute, Du Bois left out one thing. American whites are no longer Europeans like they used to be. Just like the Negro is not African, the American white is not European. And he says, therefore, it creates an identity problem for the white majority to figure out who are they too in relationship to the United States and Europe. This is what pragmatism was all about. The Notes on the States of Virginia, for example. Jefferson wants to show Europe that America's seeds, its animals, its topography, its land, its birds, its everything is as good, if not better than Europe. The Notes on the States of Virginia is Jefferson's answer. And then William James builds a whole philosophy around pragmatism at Harvard University, and one of his most famous students is W.E.B. Du Bois, if not the most famous student of William James, the father of American psychology. I call him the Michael Jordan of psychology, William James, because he's that dude at Harvard. He was. And he had a brother there too, who was a scholar. Anyway, what Cornel West says is, so it's really a triple consciousness. The black consciousness, the double consciousness blacks have with their torn relationship with the United States and not being incomplete Africans and not full Americans, as James Baldwin would put it, was a dilemma that Du Bois recognizes. But West says, but you got to factor in the people they're among, and they also are dealing with who are they. And this is where race becomes this very powerful force. But for Cornel West, he's suggesting that, for example, when people see Africans or West Indians come to America and strive, or other minorities thrive, Cornel West says, wait a minute. The West Indians white man went back. The Brazilians white man went back to Portugal. The Jamaicans went back to England. The Haitians went back to France. Canada, the United States are unique in the world, and we are the most unique country in the world in that we have more people from all parts of the world living together than anywhere. And California is the tipping point. But what's even deeper, and I don't know how many of you think about this, where else in the world do 50 million black people live with 110 million white people on the planet? You know why race is so powerful here in America? Nobody else is doing that. Brazil there might be 4 exceptions: Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. But they're all upside down. South Africa's population, white population, is smaller. Things like that. New Zealand, the Maori are marginalized for the most part. So Cornel West is saying there's more to double consciousness. There's a third leg. And then that question is, what is the European Americans' perception of who they are in relationship to Europe? Old Europe. America, once it's discovered, is the new world. In fact, John Locke says, in the beginning, there was America. That's what John Locke says. We become, again, they say we are the new Israel. We're the city on the hill. We're that, what do they call it under Reaganism? The city on the hill? American exceptionalism, isn't it? Yeah. American exceptionalism. Right. So Cornel West is at least acknowledging that Du Bois didn't acknowledge, the dynamic of black and white both being confused in a foreign land. The African and the European in the third people's land is bound to create, a lot of confusion. And again, you got to ask yourself, where else is this happening? Canada, no. Australia, again, we could argue about the demographic factors in those other 4 places. Brazil, they pretend there's no race. You can't talk about race in Brazil. A woman got arrested, if you remember last week, when she made some kind of guerrilla gesture at a person. She was visiting from Argentina, of course. Did anybody see this? A woman got arrested for making a gesture in Brazil, and I went to my class and asked my students, should we outlaw sexism? And my students were not willing to outlaw sexism. I asked them, should we outlaw racism like in Brazil? They were not willing to outlaw racism. They didn't trust government could monitor how to do that. It wasn't that they didn't think it was right. They just didn't. Their question was, who would enforce it? That was their big problem. Let me move on. So again, Johnson is an extension of the New Deal. Johnson is a part of the 30-year cycle between the New Deal and the Civil Rights Movement. In fact, I argue MAGA is a pushback on the 30-year cycle between going backwards with King and LBJ back to Roosevelt. So LBJ is a disciple of Roosevelt. He's a second lieutenant in the New Deal. When he emerges in the 60s after Kennedy, he wants to be the next FDR. That's his whole ambition. And extend the New Deal. And the New Deal runs even past Eisenhower, because Eisenhower is not a conservative Republican like Reagan becomes, like Reagan ushers in. Eisenhower was more conservative, but he was moderate as well. So Johnson represents, the New Deal Great Society. And again, when you look at their coalitions, the New Deal was blacks, Jews, liberal Protestants, labor, Catholics. Today, what's left of the New Deal are blacks, Jews, and they're not friends in the coalition, and women and gays. That's the New Deal coalition. And there's a whole lot of conflict all in there. So right now, the Democrats are fighting against each other internally. Both parties are having civil wars within themselves. And we'll see who wins out. But here, look at this. We went from Johnson quickly to Nixon. Look at the differences in their ideologies. Within one electoral cycle, reflecting our polarizations, After Nixon's near impeachment, we hired a preacher to get away from, tricky Nixon and his reputation. And then you see the same thing happen again. The country ushers in the first black president, and then boom, the backlash to it. But this is not much different than Johnson and Nixon. We might see race as the best explanatory variable, but it's just one of several possible ones. Let me see what else I have here. Here you see, and again, I don't have a whole lot of time to go over this, but this shows the cycle between 1994, 2004, 2014, and this is looking at, it's not a good picture, but it's looking at the increased polarization of Americans around conservative and liberal ideology since basically the contract with America, the New Gingrich period. And here you see political polarization of the American public. Again, it's about a 20-year cycle, 1994 to 2014, and it's showing again, the outliers are the hard partisans. The rest of us are somewhere in the middle. That's what Fiorina thinks. But others think the polarization is in the people. And some of it does seem to be. It says U.S. strained by increasing political polarization. And here you can just sort of look at the relationship of the two, I guess I'll call them mountains, if you will, where they're first cool with each other, and then they're still cool, and then all of a sudden they start breaking up right about here. And about here, they're completely broken up. And so our politics are not resolving in more and more unity. It seems to be leading to more and more of this polarization. And the question is, can the Constitution survive it? Yeah. The founders never created political parties. They warned in Federalist Paper number 10 and number 51 of the dangers of factions. And so this is the echo chamber effect. This goes back to the Bill Bishop book. It's called The Big Sort. That's the name of it. I forgot it when I was talking, but it's called The Big Sort. And it was about us self-sorting into these enclaves of people like us only. And it has nothing to do with race. This is whites amongst whites. White liberals don't want to be around white conservatives and vice versa. No love lost. But this has always been America. That's the hard part. We have a hard time accepting these realities that George Washington represents one thing and Lincoln represents another possibility. We think Lincoln and we think Lincoln and Washington would just be fine with each other. Like I was taught as a child, it was Lincoln, and then it was Washington, and it was Lincoln. Those are my first presidents. And when I grew up and started watching TV, my first president was Richard Nixon. So that's where my political socialization on Long Island came from, sitting in front of my mother's black and white in the projects watching Richard Nixon. And I have not stopped studying politics ever since I saw Richard Nixon that first time. I kid you not. But here, look, I'm looking at all of these things coming at us, and I haven't even talked about the internet, and now that's old. We're talking about AI, and that's old. I mean, I said this to my students 20 years ago. If they gave us the internet and had been using it with the CIA and other forces, what do you think they moved on to? if they democratized the internet, I think they've gone on to some more stuff. But here, it's just looking at things like fragmentation, confirmation, polarization, perception, narrative, opposition, all of these different key words, right, that have echo chamber effects. So if you're conservative, you want conservative reinforcement. If you're liberal, you want liberal reinforcement. When my students come into my class, I tell them I can't stand both parties, and they go like, whoa, what do you mean? I want you to know I have issues with both parties, and I've never belonged to either one of the parties. I'll tell you what I did, being sinister as a teenager. When I turned 18 on Long Island, I registered as a Republican, but I did it so I could vote against Ronald Reagan in the primary. So that was my politics. That's a little devil I am. But again, we're in our time where people, especially in a time of such thick polarization with the internet, what it's done, how it's interjected so much venom. And maybe the venom was already there and the internet's just revealing it. Like maybe the reality of Trump's base was already there and Trump is just exposing it. I think people are blaming Trump for what is actually genealogical in the United States. I think the founding fathers would be proud of Trump. And that's a hard pill for people to swallow. But that's like me saying the founding fathers would have been proud with Jefferson Davis too. And that's a hard pill because of the implications of what I'm suggesting. So again, the echo chamber with all of these different messages coming at you all day, you know, even us grayheads, right? On the internet all day. You know, I don't know how many of you are on TikTok. You know, that in fact that's the whole controversy now. Facebook, Instagram, all these things. I'm still waiting for them to go away because I came up like in a time when there was like, you know, I don't know, Dan Rather, you know, and you know, I even remember Walter Cronkite. God forbid, I'm sadly his name is on the Epstein list. God, that's the most shocking name on the list for the record. But I came up, you know, as a child, Walter Cronkite was on the scene still. You know, we had Ted Koppel and Britt Hume and Peter Jennings. I miss those days. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7, that's it. No cable. Right? Because the more technology we've gotten, I think, you know, there's research that shows the more alienation that's happened in our society and polarization. Think about COVID. I had 3 teenage children I stayed home with for a full year. And they were every day on their cell phones. They couldn't talk. They were pent up. As soon as they got out, when the doors were opened back up, there were all these fights all over the country in high schools. Like they unleashed all of this pent up frustration that these young people had. But this technology also created a bunch of animosity and rivalry. So kids are sitting on their computers, you know, talking about each other and threatening to kill each other and talking about each other's girlfriends and boyfriends and what they're going to do to each other when they see each other. And then they both are at McDonald's and then, whoa! You know, and it seems like, you know, that's kind of what the technology has done. Like Martin King said, time is neutral. It could be positive or negative. I think the internet can be neutral, positive or negative. But a lot of ignorant people, you know, when I was a kid, where I came from, we would sit in circles at the Boys and Girls Club and they would let us talk. And, you know, the kids that were smarter would talk. And the kids that weren't so smart kind of, you know, defer. And now the internet is sort of like the smart kids, you be quiet and let everybody else talk. You know, so, you know, that's just the evolution of technology. This is the last slide. So the question is, how much do we love America? Like, how much do we love America? Like, are you willing to let it go? And at this point in most of our lives, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? Get guns and stand by our windows and just shoot out? That's not sustainable. Part of our original DNA is also the tendency towards republicanism with a small r and democracy with a small d. And that's part of the tug right now, is the conflict between our more elite, top-down Republican, again, that's not the party, that's the ideology of republicanism, which is elite rule over the masses. Remember, democracy was not favored by Aristotle, Socrates, or Plato. They saw it as the worst form of the rule of the many. Democracy does not mean 51% over 49%. Democracy means 51% of the ghettos, barrios, the reses, the trailer parks. That's what democracy is. The Les Miserables, the masses. 51% of the masses. And this is why the Greeks didn't even, you know, like it. And again, democracy is mentioned amongst the Greeks in the Greco-Roman period. Come forward 3,000 years into the American Revolution, nobody else has bragged. Nobody else has bragged about democracy. Democracy as a word is picked up again in the Glorious Revolution in 1640, and then the American Revolution, and then you had the French Revolution, and then the Haitian Revolution is the only revolution that all these revolutions really thought they were. The Haitian Revolution liberated everyone. The American Revolution, I checked today, I don't know, I don't think I have a slide here, didn't allow women, I'm not sure if I got to that. It didn't allow women to vote. Yeah, it didn't make it. Women weren't allowed to vote under the 13 colonies. And after the American Revolution, women still couldn't vote. Except in New Jersey. That's true. The only place was New Jersey. But anywhere else in America. So the American Revolution, Black people were here before America was America. We're talking about 1555, maybe some people argue, others say 1619. That's still 100 plus years before the American Revolution. So, black people were here in chains for a century. The American Revolution happens, and they're still in chains 70 years after the American Revolution. So I ask my students all the time, how come the American Revolution didn't free everybody? And we are still struggling with some of these original genetic problems. This tendency towards elite rule and the masses is what you see when people were fighting over 2000, when there was the election in Florida with Gore and Bush. You know, people were shocked about the Electoral College. What is this Electoral College? People didn't understand. That's an elite instrument to maintain control over the masses in the popular vote. Right? So I just want to, I'll stop here and just sort of ask you, which road, are we going to take? I guess we have to try to figure out how to continue, because that's what we've been doing since the founding, is we've been riding both roads, the red and blue. That's why it's always percolating every few generations. The question is, where is this headed? At a crossroads. I think we are at a crossroads. And the question is, at the crossroads, what do you do at the crossroads? You can choose to go one way or the other. I don't know if I might live to see America end myself. I thought I'd be dead and gone before America ends. But the way they're playing right now, we're in World War III or some kind of sectional war or regional war, and this stuff can blow up. They're talking about hitting us in California. What do we do to anybody? I mean, think about the innocence of you sitting here right now and all of a sudden a bomb coming and taking all of us out. And we had nothing to do with the policies that are that are contested. So I just again say this. I love America because my grandfather died here and because his blood is here. And I love my grandfather, who I met when I was 5, and he died right away. But I've always loved the soil and the land of America because my ancestors' blood is here. And I think America is a beautiful idea. It hasn't been perfect, but it has been mostly good for most people for a long time. And now the question is, where is our dream? Where is the American dream? I don't want to pick on nobody driving a Tesla, but I can assure you that Elon is about to become a trillionaire. What do you need with $1 trillion? I mean, like, you could heal the whole world. I wish they would give Elon's money to, what's her name? Is it Mackenzie Scott? Is that her name? Yes. That's my girl. She was Toni Morrison's student at Spelman College. She went to HBCU, and Toni Morrison was her professor, I believe. I don't know if she went to HBCU. Let me correct myself. She was taught by Toni Morrison. I'll leave it at that. We're talking about Jeff Bezos' wife, who's given all the money to the HBCUs. She's basically done reparations all by herself. I kid you not. She's given like $500 billion, more than the government. And so, that would be ideal. But again, I think America is worth fighting for, dying for. I think when I was a kid, and I think when you were a kid, you grew up with a hope, and you just thought something big was coming, something more was coming as a child growing up in America. Something else was coming, and you were going to be okay. You believed in the common sense of Americanism. Now that common sense is all over the place. It's on the internet, it's in wars, it's in polarization. So I don't know what the solution is. I don't have the answer, except love. That's it. I think the only thing that we have left as a weapon is love. We can choose to love. And I don't mean it in some weak, emotional, hey, I love you guys. I mean, I love you because you're a human being. And you have a right to exist and be left alone and be unmolested as a human being. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you all for your time and your attention.
I'll just ask one question while we're waiting for others to step up to the mic. In these cycles that you see, is there like a catalyst that causes the change? Like, so you see the break. You said it's not a clear picture. So what usually happens that causes it to become a new cycle?
Yeah. It's typically a significant, what they call precipitory or catalytic event, like Rosa Parks in the back of the bus. Nobody understands what that could do. You know, an innocent confrontation leads to something where 75 years later we're talking about it. So I don't think we can clearly say this is the beginning. I think in hindsight we can look back and say, oh, that's when that started. It's like right now we're too close to whatever's happening right now to really understand it. I tell my students, you're young, you have to document what's happening now while we're all gone. When we're all gone, you have to tell the future what's happening right now. So I'm asking my students to be really alert about what they see in the world around them, not just in their private lives, but just around them, so they can look back, so we might be able to look back at a particular day, a particular event, and mark it off as the beginning of a change. It could be an election. You know, think about the Nixon JFK election was a big deal. You know, Jimmy Carter and Reagan was a big deal. People feel like we're fighting for the soul, as everybody says, the soul of America at this point. And so, you know, that's what we are. We're, you know, but I don't think we can see necessarily the moment of demarcation to say this is a backlash moment or this is a revolutionary moment until you go back. MAGA is some kind of revolution, but I think MAGA is an extension of the Reagan Revolution. MAGA was Reagan's first. Make it Great Again belonged to Reagan. And you're fired. Anybody from New York here? Were you from New York? There's a baseball team called the Yankees. There was a guy named George Steinbrenner that was known for one thing. What? Firing his people. Bob Cashman, Billy Martin 100 times, Reggie Jackson, right? There was one person in New York known for one thing. You're fired. It was George Steinbrenner. MAGA was Reagan's. My man cleaned them both off and said, MAGA's mine and you're fired is mine. And we forget about the towering personality of George Steinbrenner in New York, the original big boss New Yorker. So I'm the only person I know that remembers that and says that Trump stole "You're fired" for The Apprentice from George Steinbrenner. But nobody listens to me. Nobody listens to me, but that's my philosophy. But that's just, we can sit and have a beer and talk about that. I'm just going to say, yes.
I can touch, and I know we've touched on it a lot, but with the effect of technology, communication, social media, how these cycles are going from 20 to 30 years to overnight.
Good point.
So I don't know how much.
You think it expands it? You think it expands it?
Of seeing all these cycles happen so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you see that too. I mean, I have a 19-year-old. Within your students are absorbing the information or overwhelmed because we're the one older generation that are overwhelmed, but they're maybe getting it quicker.
They
so
have.
I don't know how that pendulum swings that maybe you're seeing at an education level with your students.
Yeah.
And I think that's something maybe we struggle with here is how do we react and organize so quickly when things are happening so quickly. I kind of struggle with my question on it, but it seems like the human mind wasn't made to absorb so much so quickly.
Good point. The teacher of the year about 10 years ago wrote an open letter, I think in the New York Times, warning the university professors that the generation that came up on No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top is coming into the campuses now, and they have no critical thinking skills. This is a letter in the Times warning professors, the cohorts of students coming, they don't think critically. They don't voluntarily read James Baldwin or Toni Morrison. I did. I read Baldwin. I read everything I could on buses, in cars. I educated myself better than my universities did. My daughter reads Toni Morrison. She's 15. I'm happy about that. But I don't see many teenagers holding books, reading them in the bookstores. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm just saying the intellectual inquiry that we had in the 20th century, we were trying to figure something out to be something more. And it seems like you say in your question, there's this, I think it's some kind of fragmentation. And the power is going to be wherever those parts fragment to, and whoever's the Jim Jones of those, you know, of those locuses where the fragmentation is. For example, what I mean is, today Martin Luther King could not be Martin Luther King. Today Malcolm X could not be Malcolm X. You can give Malcolm X and Martin King the internet, and they will be just 2 more voices amongst 8 billion voices. Back in the day, they had 247. That's why Martin and Malcolm are famous. Today, Martin and Malcolm couldn't be famous. Now, there's a bunch of non-famous people getting famous all day, right? And that's the flip that's happened. Fame, you know, celebrity is, and it's frustrating to people who have expertise. Like if you're a medical doctor or ophthalmologist or an accountant out in this audience, and then you go online and just see insanity, and you're like, wait, but no, that person didn't go to school. No, don't like that. You know, expertise has seemed to go out the window. This is why you see places like China, I think it is, requiring expertise if you're opining on the internet about certain things. I think that's a great rule. Bring back expertise. Like if we're talking about, I don't know, healthcare. You know, let the healthcare experts get up front, but we don't want to be undemocratic and not let everybody have say. It's just let the experts tell us what they know. But now there's so much distrust of experts, their expertise is distrusted. Man, I don't want to start, and I don't want to lose anybody by saying this next thing. I didn't know what to think during COVID about the inoculations. I was so confused. I was like, my mama took me when I was a kid, and I got measles, mumps, and all of that, and I'm fine. But then there was this pushback here in California against Newsom and others, and in the country, Dr. Fauci, about whether these vaccines were good or not. And so again, that's not something that would happen in the 70s or the 80s. We had a consensus on mumps and measles and chickenpox vaccinations. Now our polarization leads us to fight over what none of us have medical expertise on. And now everybody's become a medical expert. What was the football player out of Berkeley that just went and he was with Pittsburgh? Aaron Rodgers. Man, Aaron, be quiet. I mean, like, I'm not going to opine on the vaccine because I don't know. Like, I would listen to both sides. But I'm not going to, but what I'm trying to show you is there was a time when we didn't debate about vaccines in America. The basic ones that we got for school and to be in public. Now, half this side doesn't like it, this side does. And we'll fight each other over political policy around vaccines. That's deep to me. I'm glad, I'll be honest with you, I'm glad I'm mostly gone from this earth. I'm not afraid to die, I don't care about dying. I don't want to be here much longer. This shit has gotten ridiculous. Excuse my language in the church, I apologize. But it's just gotten to the point where it's like, where's the beauty of being, like, there was a time when America meant something beautiful. It meant something green. I don't know what I mean by green. It just meant something green and beautiful. And water, the azure blue. And now it's, a lot of negativity, a lot of negative energy all over the world. And I think there's more good in the world than evil. But honestly, the way this world is going, I don't know. Who knows where we're going over the next 15 years? Who knows where we're going over the next month? I'm sorry, the next person.
I agree with so much of what you're saying, the noise, but what really has killed me over the last X number of years is the alternate facts. I mean, I would go back to the major three in 2 seconds. I remember Walter Cronkite, when he finally turned against the Vietnam War, that said people listened. And we all agreed about it. We might disagree about little political things, Republican versus Democrat, but we could talk to each other. And engaging people is really tough these days because they come up with all this stuff. They're just blatant lies.
Real quickly, Tip O'Neill, Irishman, Ronald Reagan, Irishman, sit down with some Irish whiskey, sit down, drink together, and they would come to some sort of, some working disagreement or agreement, Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They didn't hate each other. They say now the party, the two major parties in the major branches are doing the self-sorting that we talked about. So they're not even talking to each other like we thought they used to. Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Now it's Maxine Waters versus everybody. Go ahead.
Well, when she was head of House, the Committee on Financial Services, boy, she got a lot of work done. And boy, would I like to see that change. But having grown up, I'm a little older than you. I remember the enthusiasm of John Kennedy. Everybody was excited, and we can do something. I mean, let's face it, Eisenhower was not the war general. He played golf and had heart attacks. And
Right.
Come through. But at least we didn't have McCarthy as our president.
Right.
The guy we have right now is just horrible. And it's how do we regain that conversation? How do we regain sanity? And that's
Yeah, I think the tug is going to be between the Democratic forces and again, I'm not talking about the parties. The Democratic forces, people that love democracy, philosophically. Jürgen Habermas died a couple of days ago, and they talked about his belief that words and communication is what can bring us out of dark moments like these. So it's kind of fitting that he dies at this moment when we sort of look at people like him and Jesse Jackson and review their careers, and we realize how much great work they did. Habermas was all about, because he's born out of he's 12 years old when the Holocaust, when the Shoah happens, he's very conscious of what had just happened before he was born, Habermas. So his whole philosophy is about supporting democracy and expanding democracy and using language and communication to promote democracy. So in other words, our words matter. That's why I said love. If I said a terrible thing in this room right now and upset everyone, I would upset everyone's day, and you would go home with your family, you'd be cussing me out in the car, you'd get home, late at night, you have a thought, and you'd still be mad about something I said inappropriately, right? But what if I say love? Take that home. Be at home tonight in front of the TV and say, yeah, love, I'm gonna try love tomorrow. And I don't mean go to work and be a weak person and bow down to other people. I mean, you just have a general understanding that we're all human beings living. And to me, looking at the Pacific Ocean, looking at birds, lions, I spend all day online looking at lions and gorillas and zebra, because that's what my mother did when I was a kid. I sat and watched Jacques Cousteau with my mama as a child. So that's the thing I still do now that she's gone. I still watch them. But that's the beauty of life. Do you realize if they are, and there's got to be a million, billion, trillion aliens out there. Like in the 70s, we thought that was crazy. Now you're crazy if you don't believe there's aliens out there with the technology. But think about it. Even if there is or isn't, you as a human being, every day you get to see the sun 8 minutes behind you. You get to see the ocean. And then you're in California where it's better than anywhere else on the planet. You get to see green and water and trees and mountains and birds and nuts, right? And you get to hear music. Being a human being is an awesome thing. We were not made to live the way we live. You might defend the status quo all you want. I don't have some communist philosophy hiding up under my words. I just know we're supposed to live better than we're living. I know we weren't made for this. I know we weren't made to be slaves to our jobs and even to our families and our bills and our burdens. We were born to be free. Like Thoreau. That's Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. We were born to be free men and women. And then we joined this social compact they taught us for safety, but the social compact is fractured right now. And I think it's going to take is love and love for democracy, perhaps, to get to a better place.
2 more questions.
Hi, I greatly enjoyed your talk. Thank you for coming. It was great. So I have this observation. When Joe Biden was running for president, he had disclosed his tax statements, his financial statement. I was astonished to learn, and I'm not a wealthy guy, I was astonished to learn that my net worth was greater than his. Nowadays, we have Trump in office. In his inauguration, there were oligarchs, and there were billionaires. His cabinet has more billionaires than any other president in history. I would argue that another thing that divides us is wealth.
Yeah.
We have the ultra wealthy and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And they're influencing policy, making laws. I think that's kind of dated.
And I would simply say the Gilded Age was followed by the New Deal. So that's a pendulum swing. And where we are now, I tell my students, the way Congress, I'm talking about Woodrow Wilson's PhD dissertation, and then Woodrow Wilson's second book. His first book was Congressional Government, and he said Congress has all the power. Then he became president, he wrote a second book called Presidential Government, and he said President has the power. But Congress is, you know, if the Johnson wing of the House would act like the Republican Party did in the 60s and 70s, we would not have the chaos we have. The Republican Party stood their ground on principle, on, you know, they were the Rockefeller Republicans, right? They were pre-Reagan Republicans. But now, again, that polarization that we're talking about plays out in the parties where it doesn't matter about the flag or the Constitution, it's my side's gotta win. And this winning or losing, I think ends up hurting the majority of people. When you're an outlying partisan, you know, when you're polarized on the outlying ends, most of us are not, you know, extremists, but most partisans are extremists. And so when they're fighting red and blue, we end up taking sides with people we don't agree with entirely. I agree with Bernie more than anybody in America right now. Bernie is Martin Luther King's true disciple, not Obama, not Kamala, not if you can get this boy, what's his name? The speaker of the Hakeem Jeffries. Those are not the disciples of Martin King. Bernie is the only person in America who teaches the values that Martin Luther King and FDR and the New Deal embrace. Bernie is a New Deal, you know, Democrat socialist. Martin Luther King was a New Deal Democrat socialist. And most people don't know that about King, but he was very much a socialist. He just was afraid because of the power, you know, the FBI, COINTELPRO, to openly express pro-communist views. So King would not talk about economic elements in the I Have a Dream. But if you notice in the I Have a Dream, King talks about a check 4 times, bouncing, before he says, dream once. King asked for reparations in I Have a Dream 4 times, and nobody heard King say reparations. He says, we came to cash a check, and it's come back marked insufficient funds. But everybody heard the dream. Everybody heard the color, not the content of character, not the color of skin. They didn't hear the check. So those who love Martin Luther King, you got to hear the check as well as the dream. I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is a good one. Do you think the MAGA extreme of the pendulum, where do you think they are in the pendulum, and how long before they develop a new cycle?
I think the midterms. I think the midterms ends all of this. One way or the other. I don't think anything's going to happen to the midterms. I don't think there's going to be any kind of martial law nonsense. People like to upset you and upset you and upset you and upset you because it sells. And then it doesn't happen. Like, remember about 6 months ago, they were talking about the rapture? All over the internet, everybody waiting for Rapture Day, and Rapture Day came and left, and it was like, what happened to the rapture? So everybody's trying to scare you into a particular idea or philosophy. So remember your question though?
It was how long before we develop a new cycle?
Yeah, you know, I think in the short term, electorally. Now, socially, culturally, I don't think you can do anything about it. People are going to be who they are. And there's a southern style, a rural style, an urban style. There's all these diversities in America. I don't want the Southerners not to be a Southerner. Black Southerners love the South. They have very little problem with the Confederate flag because they have a way of living side by side with this. As long as you keep your safety, your distance, we keep ours, you can have your flag. Just don't impose it on me. You know, the black population is moving south since 1970 and unrelenting in every city. That's why San Francisco's down to 3%. And we're having all these baby booms amongst most of the non-white population. I think this is coming to an end in the short term electorally, but I think we're going to have more and more conflict around what is the future, what is America going forward? What is multi-America going to be like? Is multi-America going to be hierarchical, or is multi-America going to be democratic? And the problem is, for centuries, it's been hierarchical. And the question is, can the white majority accept being, you know, leveled, as they called it, leveling with the democracy? And that's why you don't hear many, conservative bragging, saying anything about democracy, because they understand the democratic implications are the bottom becomes the top. So I think in the short term, I think the midterm elections are going to be a terrible defeat for Donald Trump. One, because it happened in 2018 to Donald Trump. People don't have a good sense of history. Trump has faced midterms before. Obama faced him in 2010 with the Tea Party and the birther movement, and Obama got beat in like an 80-year record of butt whooping. Remember, he came out and Obama said, "I was chastened." Because he got whooped so bad, nobody had gotten beat that bad in midterms in 80 years. And then Trump comes along 8 years later, boom, and he beats Obama. That's the one thing he beat Obama in. That's to make him happy. So I don't know. The midterms, I think, are going to be significant because the sitting president, no matter what party they're in, almost guarantees to lose 25 seats. Then you had Marjorie Taylor Greene, and you've seen, we had a Republican here in California die recently in Congress, right? We've seen about 30 more Republicans stepping down. They can see the sea coming. But my argument is this, and you're not going to hear this from anybody else, all this analysis. There's a red wave coming, not a blue wave. What happened in Texas was, my red wave is this. The red wave is going to be Republicans who remember who they've always been and who they are, staying home and suppressing turnout. So the red wave is going to be Republicans staying home, like they did in Texas recently. If blacks had come out for Jasmine Crockett, she could have easily won against the fellow Democratic Tarico, whatever his name is, Tarico. A lot, they said hundreds of thousands of blacks were in Texas that just didn't come out. She only needed about 5 more thousand black votes. So that's kind of what has happened. This is why Stacey Abrams was so important. She in Georgia understood the never voter is more important than the, what do they call it, the voter who votes all the time? The regular voter. Stacey Abrams went and got people like my brothers who would never vote, as opposed to somebody who's a soft Democrat who you can get to vote easy. That's the problem with most of the parties. After every election, look at the large number of people at any level who don't vote at all. The never voter is the future. But most party leaders, other than Stacey Abrams, and the Democrats are so dumb, they haven't held on to her strategy of continuing to go get the never voter. Get the brother on the block. Get the elders, get people who don't vote to vote. Not the sometimes voter, or there's a political science word for it. I feel so bad right now, I can't think of it. But the word for a regular voter is basically, if they voted last time, you can predict that they'll vote again. But the never voter never votes. They rarely vote. And that's a sea of blue that the Democrats haven't tapped into because they want to be Republican. Bernie is the only truth in politics in America today. Everything else is a lie. Bernie is the truth. And I didn't vote for Bernie. But I know Martin Luther King when I hear him. And Bernie represents the values of your grandfather and your grandmother when there was the New Deal. That's who Bernie is. Forget his socialism. His socialism is Democrat, is the New Deal liberalism. So I think the midterms are going to be devastating for Trump. 25 seats guaranteed, probably 40, 50. He gets impeached by February or March. I said that recently. Johnson came out and said the Republicans are going to win in the midterms. I'm like, well, it's happened twice where men have gained seats in the midterms in the last 100 years. Once was Bill Clinton. After they impeached him, the country told the Republicans to, punish him and move on. What was it called? MoveOn.org? It was like censor him and move on, right? And so as a consequence, they got punished and Clinton gained seats in the midterm. The other one was George Bush, the son. After 9/11, George Bush got support from the country because of 9/11 and he won the midterm. Those are two examples. That's it. In the last 100 years. And Trump has been president before and didn't do it. And this idea that there's going to be this martial law nonsense, no, they lost to Minnesota. Minnesota ran them out. So if they were going to win, no, I'm serious, and this is the last thing I'm going to say. If they were going to win that martial law, they had to win in Minnesota and they lost. The people fought back. And when they saw everyday people getting shot in the head. And it could have been any one of you or your daughters or your sons just minding their business, going through some confusion and a traffic thing. I don't know about her politics, I'm not into that, but I just know that I didn't grow up in America, even for black people, where police walk up to you and shoot you in your damn head. That just didn't happen in this country. So I think the midterms are going to be a big deal, and I think after that, we'll see. It's going to be a lot of chaos, but I think the middle has not given up yet. Since Trump first ran, I was on the Commonwealth Club with Harvard lawyer Lawrence Lessig, and it was he and I before a crowd like this, one-on-one, on his book. And what he argued about the law and about judges is that the center always holds. As a professor, for example, my colleagues in my job, they can't act any way they want to because they have to deal with the other professors as a peer pressure. And judges can't be out on the outlying polarization side because of the peer pressure. So the center of the courts have held the entire time. And then it's the last thing. There have been 29 special elections since 2024, 29 to the Democrats, 0 to the Republicans. So y'all think these are all good signs for Trump? 29-0 since he got back in office. They haven't won one single special election. And they've created deep red MAGA districts in Alabama and Mississippi and lost. They don't even run Miami no more. Excuse my language. Excuse my bad English. So I'll stop there because I see they want me to stop. But again, I'm excited. I'm excited because I think there's a lot to be hopeful for. I think the future is bright. I think love will prevail. Thank you all for your time.
But first I have a few announcements I want to make. Just a few events coming up. Tuesday, March 17th in San Francisco. It's a rally organized by Indivisible Tri-Valley for Miguel Lopez, a Livermore resident who was stolen by ICE last year and he was deported to Mexico. He has a hearing on Tuesday in San Francisco that I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it could determine his fate going forward. So they're encouraging people to join if possible. There's a sign-up sheet in the back, or a sheet with a QR code that you can take a picture of and sign up for that. On Wednesday, March 18th, we're having a Zoom special meeting, which will be an update on the Iran war from Dr. Sahar Razavi of Sacramento State University. She'll talk about what's going on there and give us some historical context, and then also how Iranians are feeling right now with the war that's happening to them. And then on Saturday, March 28th, is our No Kings rally. Yeah. It'll be our biggest one yet. From 10 to noon at Portola Park. You can check our website on the event page. You can sign up that way. And I'll have a couple more announcements at the end, but I want to get to our next speaker, Jessica Krauth. Do you want to come up, Jessica? She is a private practice mental health therapist based here in Livermore, and she'll speak on the mental health impact of the current political climate, which we've talked about, and Professor Taylor talked about, also about some of the ways that we're feeling, and then how we can take care of our own personal mental health during this time of chronic stress. So, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, sorry, I am fighting a little bit of a cold, so I will probably need the microphone so I don't lose my voice. All right, welcome in. Thanks for coming, and thanks to Dr. Taylor. Did you hear me sneak out? Yes. Okay, well, thanks to him. He had great energy. Okay, as Marla said, my name is Jessica. I am, this is a little bit about me. I'm a private practice therapist here in Livermore. I come from Florida, so I come from the South. I know that Southern culture he was talking about. I've kind of worked in all areas of mental health. I've done higher ed disability services. I've done some community mental health in rural Wisconsin, where I worked with a lot of primarily Medicaid clients and children. And then here in Livermore, I work with
a little bit of everyone. I see kids ages 8 and up, all the way to adults. And so I'm kind of here today. Marla had reached out to me to kind of ask a lot of questions around how are people feeling right now with kind of all the stuff that's been happening politically. She specifically reached out to me kind of after everything was happening in Minneapolis and seeing public deaths on social media and television. And so we had some questions around the tolls that can have on us. And so that kind of inspired me to do a little bit of research and kind of see not just what am I observing, but what is the data telling us around these kinds of things. So yeah, that's a little about me and why I'm here. Quick disclaimer, I am a therapist, I am not your therapist. So we kind of have to do this disclaimer just to say that this is general mental health information. It is not meant to be specific to any one person. Please take care of yourself. Reach out to your own doctors and mental health practitioners. Yeah. Okay, so I was going to start with a little bit of a meditation, but for the sake of time, we're just going to do a short little reflection. So I know that a lot of these topics that we cover are very heavy, they're very personal. So I invite you to just take a moment. You feel free to close your eyes if you want to. Take a couple of nice deep breaths if you like, and just see if you can kind of identify how are you feeling in this moment in time. And you can take that phrase however you want. It can be right here, right now in this room, or if you prefer, you can kind of think of like the broader socio-political moment that we're in right now. Just kind of take a moment, see if you can tap into how that feels for you. Make sure to breathe. All right. Do we have that feeling? Yeah? Okay. Let's come on back into the room. And just because of who I am as a person in my profession, we have a feelings wheel. If you struggled to name that feeling, I invite you now to look at our wheel and just kind of see if you can place it. There's a lot of power in language. There's a lot of power in being able to name and label what is happening. Often as therapists, especially if you've ever done any kind of CBT, cognitive behavioral work, we'll even kind of have you take that path from, okay, what happened, how do you feel, and what are you thinking about it? And so the ability to accurately pinpoint that word is very important. Yeah, take a picture. You can also Google this. There's a million different versions of it. I just Googled feelings wheel. Super simple. Yes?
Can you explain how this works as far as emanating from the center? Like, what are the words on the outside mean?
Yeah, so the way I usually think about it is the center is what I call our inside out characters. It is, hey, Inside Out, gold star, that movie, so much good information. But you'll see kind of all those familiar emotions on the inside circle, right? All the ones that kind of we teach to our kids. They're sort of the broad buckets of feelings. And then as you kind of go out, I've never noticed any particular like I don't know that it necessarily gets more in depth the further out that you go on the wheel. But like you can see like happy, right? That yellow wedge. We've got optimistic, peaceful, proud. Like these are all kind of things that we want to feel. The other ones, you know, they are kind of in those like broad buckets and then they get more specific. So usually what I'll have people do if they really are just unsure is we'll kind of start in the center and then sort of look at that wedge and see if anything in there speaks to you. So, yeah. This is, I think every therapist has a specific kind of love for this wheel. I've seen it printed on pillows. That's how much we love it. Yeah. I haven't quite gotten that far, but I do have a large blank wall in my office, so I've been tempted a few times. Okay, so as I said, when I was invited to do this talk, I did kind of go and look at some of the literature around it, just because, like, obviously I have a sense of how people are feeling from what I'm experiencing in my therapy room, but I kind of wanted to know what the data was saying around how people are feeling, what does that impact. I was kind of looking to see if there was any like long-term data versus short-term. The answer is there's not really that much long-term data. I think politics and kind of the things that are happening are changing too rapidly right now, and human beings have extraordinarily short memories. So it's kind of been a little over the place. But anyway, this study was kind of looking at sort of both health and like mental emotional impacts. And so they did a scale that they based off of a drug and alcohol scale. And they administered this in March 2017 and October 2020. So there was kind of a range of how people were feeling, but the general consensus was that people were experiencing a lot higher of physical, psychological, and social health negative impacts because of politics. So if you look at the time frame, the first time they did it was right after Trump's first successful election. Second one you will see is in 2020, so that was after Biden was elected, but also that was during COVID. So I think that kind of still had a lot of impact on that one. And then the bottom bullet point here I thought was really interesting. They kind of parsed out the data to see who specifically was reporting higher negative impacts based on politics. So people who are younger, specifically people who reported being part of the Democratic Party, people who are actively engaged in politics, which kind of makes sense because you're a little bit more involved, you care about it, you know. But the part that I thought was really interesting, and we'll kind of touch on that a couple times, is those who had lower levels of political knowledge reported being more distressed about it. So I thought that was interesting because I was like, that doesn't really add up, right? My armchair theory on that is, we'll talk about it more when we get to social media and stuff like that, but if you don't know how things work and you're hearing everything that's being said online and you know, all the misinformation that's out there, you're more likely to be swayed by things like that. So this is just some other kind of things that I pulled out of that study, just based on like what specific factors are harming health and mental health. So they listed popular culture, right? We've got a lot of stuff in popular culture. We've got those late night comedy shows. We've got, you know, social media, all that kind of stuff. Social media is on there. The big one for me, 24-hour news cycle, right? I find myself constantly kind of going like, whatever happened to that thing that was freaking everyone out last week, right? Like these things are happening that seem so big and so important. Like literally last week I was like, what is happening in Venezuela? That was a huge deal. What was that, 2 months ago? I don't think I've heard anything. So 24-hour news cycle, right? Things are just getting buried. We're having these big spikes of like panic and worry, and then we never hear about it again. So there's no, we'll talk about the stress cycle, but there's no resolution to it. There's no, like the story doesn't stop. And then witnessing political conflict. So that kind of goes back to, you know, being able to see these videos online, seeing even just like the rhetoric online around, like, I mean, who here has seen someone get in a fight about politics on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, right? Everyone, right? And so all of that really, it like engages our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight response. So it makes us feel like we are literally in danger, and then again, there's little to no resolution to that feeling. 1 in 5 Americans report being targets of online harassment due to political beliefs. So again, that's that you post something on Facebook and then your great aunt's cousin's neighbor comes on and like, you know, gets on to you about it. And then 2 out of 3 Americans report recent elections as a significant source of stress. So I imagine everyone that's inspired to be here today really feels that. And then with that one specifically, supporters of a losing candidate report higher rates of stress, which also we've seen leads to things like alcohol consumption and then higher rates of being diagnosed with things like anxiety and depression. So this is where I have that little marker of these studies were all kind of moment in time snapshots, right? So again, it was that March 2017, October 2020. They were just kind of self-report scales in that moment. We don't really have a lot of data tracking over time. We don't have anything about one singular person from, you know, this time period to that time period. So I think that is a big spot where I couldn't find much. I mean, my next study talks about it a little bit, but I don't think in a significant way. We'll just move on to that. So this is another study that I looked at that was looking at kind of more of the day-to-day, right? So our last one looked at political elections. This one did kind of a journal method over a 2 or 3 week period. So that's where I was like, okay, they attempted to do the overtime, but I don't know, 3 weeks I don't think is enough for that. But first, the reason why they did it is because they were acknowledging that politics is very personal to all of us, right? It's not just what do we think is best for our country, but at the end of the day, it comes down to what is best for us, right? We have personal autonomy, finances, and then kind of more core moral beliefs that come into all of that, right? We wouldn't care so much if it didn't matter. That's why they did this study, because they were kind of looking at the day-to-day, the what's happening, like when we hear these news stories, what's happening for us, where, you know, we're feeling some type of way, we're feeling either stressed or happy, or, you know, it goes both ways, right? It's not always stress, sometimes we get good news. And so they were kind of looking at the ups and downs of that. What I thought was interesting in the study, meeting me, is they also looked at the ways that people were dealing with those stressors. So they specifically looked at using emotional regulation techniques of reframing, which is kind of trying to look at something differently, often in a more positive light. They looked at distraction, and then they looked at emotional suppression, which is that classic, I'm just not gonna think about it, I don't wanna feel that right now. It's a common one, I wouldn't say it's a very effective one. So the results of that one were basically that day-to-day political events obviously are producing negative emotional reactions. We know that, right? We're doing these studies just to confirm what we know. We also did find out from this one that people who use cognitive reframing do experience better results. They're more able to kind of get out of the funk, out of the panic from that. So we can talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The part that I thought was really interesting, especially for this group, is that study did show that people who were able to get themselves up and out of that feeling were also less inclined to participate in political activism. So make of that what you will. I'm not advocating for anything in particular, but the powers that be can use that for good or evil. Anyway, so actually let's go back to that for a second. Yeah, so my takeaway from this was basically it was exactly what I thought it would be. Like when I was reading through this study and I was looking at those 3 different ways of emotional regulation, I could have told you which one was going to work best, and it was exactly that. I don't think that those are complete lists by any means of like ways to handle emotions, and so we'll talk more about that too. Sorry. Anyway, so moving on. So these are signs of burnout. I just wanted to throw this in here because burnout is often what we experience when we have chronic stress, right? Anytime, and when I say chronic stress, I mean things that are causing that, basically that fight or flight reaction to happen regularly. So when we're existing in a space where, you know, things are regularly causing us to feel overwhelmed or stressed out or like we can't handle everything or scared or, you know, any of that. When that is happening regularly, consistently, then we can experience burnout. So that could be physical exhaustion. That's the like, I don't want to get out of bed feeling, this day feels too hard. Compassion fatigue, that like, I don't care anymore, right? It really is hard when we get to that point, but it does happen. Feeling like you're having trouble concentrating or feeling unproductive, procrastinating, or withdrawing socially. So again, that like, I don't want to be part of my community right now, it feels too hard, is a sign of burnout. And this isn't a super exhaustive list, there is more, I just didn't want to put everything on here, it's a lot. Okay, so what do we do with it? That's kind of why we're here, right? So this is the stress cycle. I think it's really important to understand the stress cycle before we can really understand how to get out of it. And I always teach this to my clients in some way or another, because I'm a very, I guess you'd call that a top-down person, where I want to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And this is kind of part to that disclaimer where like everyone's a little bit different. I'm going to kind of give out a bunch of ideas here, and they may not all work for you, that's okay. But if we understand kind of the general why of why these things are helpful, then we can start to get creative and find our own methods. So the stress cycle is basically we have a stressor, our stress response kicks in. So can you read that? It's so tiny. Whatever, we're gonna wing it. So the stress response kicks in, which biologically is, again, is that fight or flight response. Our bodies don't know how to differentiate between like, oh no, a bear is coming, or like something politically across the world is stressing us out. Our brains don't know how to differentiate that. Like maybe someday evolution will kick in and we'll get better at that, but for right now, we just don't know the difference. Number 3 is we deal with the stressor, ideally, right? And so that is that acknowledgement that some things can be fixed, right? If the stressor is like, oh, I'm really hungry and I'm like far away from home and that's stressing me out, I'm hangry, I'm gonna go get food and I'm gonna eat and that's gonna get resolved. Again, when we're talking about political stuff, I am one person in a country of how many billions of people live here? There's only so much that one person can do. Not to minimize anyone's specific impact, but I do hear that a lot from the people that I work with of like, well, I'm really stressed out, this is really getting to me, but what can I do, right? So that's where we get stuck in the stress cycle, as if it's not something that can be solved. So ideally in the stress cycle, that number 4 is deactivate the stress response, and then we can kind of go back into our sort of our neutral, like if we're talking about the nervous system, right, we have fight or flight and we have rest or digest. So the ideal is we want to resolve that stress cycle and then kind of come back to normal. What's happening in chronic stress is we don't have an exit ramp from that stress cycle, and so we kind of just stay in that place. Or the exit ramp is something, I'm going to say non-helpful. So like I said, like that previous study said that a lot of people who are dealing with like the loss of their preferred candidate in an election, we see higher rates of alcohol use and things like that. So that would be a exit from the stress cycle, sure, but it's not a sustainable long term. To put it mildly. And there's a lot of that too, where like, sure, it feels good in the moment, but like, you know. Anyway, so resolving the stress cycle. There's a few tried and true things that would truly get us out of the stress cycle. Things that I think about are things that kind of hack your nervous system and like literally signal to your brain like you're okay, you're safe, right? And then other things are things that again kind of signal to our brain that we have resolved that problem. And so that like resolving that problem isn't always like a true resolution, but it's just tricking your body into thinking you've done it, right? So that's physical activity is a huge version of that, right? Again, if our body says, oh no, a bear is coming to eat me, right? What are we gonna do? We're gonna run away from the bear, right? And so physical activity kind of signals to your brain that you are running away from that bear. It's also just really good for all of the happy, healthy hormones in your brain. Someone literally quoted the Legally Blonde at me the other day. I heard, okay, you guys know what I'm talking about, the happy people just don't kill their husbands or whatever. Exercise gives you endorphins, that one. I was like, yeah, okay. Anyway, it's true, right? If we're moving our bodies, we are resolving that stress cycle, we are feeling a little bit better. Is it permanent? No, but a little bit of regular exercise does go a long way for mental health. The second one, breath work, right? Similar thing, my other joke I say is what can you not do when you're running away from a bear? It's take a deep breath. The bear doesn't care, it'll just eat you. And so what that says to our brain, if we can stop and take a few deep breaths, is it literally tells our brain, okay, I'm okay, right? We're all fine. Literally telling it that we don't need to be worried. We've escaped, basically. Personal connection, this is the community piece. I keep going back to the Barretts because that's what every single researcher talks about when they're talking about this system. Another book that I read went, when you escape from the bear, you're going to go back to your village and you're going to tell them all about it, right? And like, I got away from the bear. And so personal connection is part of that too. Other advantages of connection and community is I think it's also spaces where you can go into and you can go, you know what, I'm really feeling this type of way about this thing, and people can go, yeah, me too, right? And that me too really does a huge thing for us. It validates how we feel. It tells us that it's not just me, right? This is something that that is like normal and makes sense to feel. So that kind of goes a long way for calming down that system. Creativity, right? I don't know if I really have a good explanation for this one. This one has nothing to do with the bear, but you can draw the bear. Draw the bear and then set it on fire. I had a teenager in my office the other day, and she was telling me how mad she was, and she just wanted to hit someone and all of that. And I just took a stack of paper and I said, why don't you just tear this up, right? And I don't know, I think it helped. It helped me. I was tearing up paper too. That's not necessarily creative, but there's like a lot of stuff that people do with creativity where they can like get out that feeling, or they can find a different way to express it. But I do think that we do kind of have to be in a grounded part of self to really like engage with creativity as well. And then lastly, laughter, right? There's a reason why there's a million late night talk shows that make jokes about politics, and it's because it, like, is it funny? No, not really, but if we can make jokes about it, we can feel a little bit better about it for a minute. And so all of those are ways to resolve the stress cycle. There's no absolute like one best technique, but I think if we kind of land in those broad categories, we're in a good place. So these next few slides are just kind of my like personal observations, things that I see in my therapy room that I'm noticing are not helpful to people or are helpful. I honestly don't remember what's on the next couple of slides. It's an adventure for all of us. But this one in particular is things that I find myself talking about a lot. When I was working, like during COVID, for example, all of the time I was saying, get off the news. You know, during COVID, I remember there was 100 times a day a new news story about what was happening. And kind of what I found myself saying was there's no new information coming out that is going to change how you feel about it right this second. And I also would say things like, if there was something that was super new and important and life-changing, like someone's gonna tell you about it. You know, we don't need to be constantly monitoring the news. I do also have this. I don't know if you guys might have seen this before. Can we open it? Yes. So this is the media bias chart. This is another thing that I find myself telling people about a lot. Are you guys familiar with this? Have we seen it? Yeah. So that's my other caveat with being mindful of the news, is also kind of being mindful of what specifically you are consuming on the news, right? We know that news media